Alrighty, I think here we are. Yep. So I've got a lot of the stuff worked out in the story. If you're looking for today's uploads for edited video for the Star Trek The Next Generation game, I'm going to try to do those right after this. And I'm going to try to do them live because I seem to have some success with that, whereas the editing thing, it's not quite worked out this time. The program I use for editing made some changes to how files are formatted and exported. So I'm trying to relearn how to do that. But it shouldn't be that hard. But I did miss last night where it uploaded an hour-long video where 45 minutes of it was blackness after the end of the video. I did fix that, so it's better over there. But that was not as intended. So I'm going back through and trying to figure out some of that again. But I still like to do these live better than the edited. I mean, my format for the video structure is pretty straightforward. There's no reason why I couldn't get away with doing it live, except for unexpected background noises like motorcycles driving by. Thank you, motorcycles at 10:30 at night. And my propensity for flubbing it. But I'm starting to feel like, so what? I should maybe just include the flubs. Anyway, so working on the writing that I'm working on right now, I think I sort of had that breakthrough moment that I always love finding in any creative process, where I was thinking, like, I was really at a point the other day where I'm like, I have like 14 story outlines on a shelf somewhere that I'm going to come back to at some point, but I'm not like invested in any of them right now. And I know that there sometimes if I go and take a look at a work, so if I take a look at one of my outlines or one of my prompts, that I can get back into the groove of that idea and get excited enough to start working on it. But it doesn't always happen that way. And so I was a little worried that I wouldn't be able to find something to play with. And then I can't even remember why it hit me the other day, where I was sort of like, what should I write about? What should I write about? And for a long while, I've had some ideas of like supernatural contemporary. So I would hesitate to call them urban fantasy. So like an urban fantasy has a tendency to be like, oh, like I want to call it like Shadowrun, where you have like elves, dwarves, and humans and trolls and orcs all living in the city doing whatnot. But there's an aspect of urban fantasy that I wanted to explore. If you've ever watched the old TV show, I call it old, but the TV show Angel or Buffy, the sense that our world is our world, the one we all know, but there is an underlayer of supernatural things going on. And then there's an aspect of like Hellboy that does something similar, where for most people, the mundane world is as it is. We know it the way it is. But there's always some supernatural things going on in the underground, and there's a whole second world, just one layer separated from us. And so I've always kind of found some of that fun. And to a certain degree in Harry Potter, they have the, the mundane world, and then there's the wizarding world that's just sort of one step through the brick wall at whatever platform that was at the train station. I forget what that was. Something and 3/4. Or no, is that the Mad Hatter's hat? Anyway, you get the basic idea of a world with a sort of an echo world just off the side of it. And I sometimes feel like in a story setting, are we the echo world or are they the echo world would be a fun area to play in. But aside from that, I have to work out a little bit more about the world and my mind keeps wanting to drag it back into play where I can fiddle with it a little more, because I have several stories that take place in this kind of setting, and they're all kind of different. I have one setting, one story setting where the main character is an adopted child who didn't know that their genetic parents were werewolves and whatnot. And so there's a whole were community that exists out there. And he somehow gets brought back into the fold without knowing he was ever one of them. But because he wasn't raised in the way that they're supposed to be raised, he's still an outsider, and he didn't do the things he needed to do to become a full-fledged member of the society when they should have happened. And so he's always sort of like the quirky broken were, and not really welcomed, as if sort of like he's an outcast because of the lifestyle, and the way he exists is not compatible with the way that the culture would have preferred him to be raised. So there's that story. And the main character for that story, I've built a setting, I've built the main character with some of the side characters to be introduced through different stories. And that character sort of becomes I don't want to call it a private investigator, because he's less of an investigator and more of I don't even want to call him an enforcer. He is sort of, I guess in cyberpunk it would be something more along the lines of a street samurai. You're sort of the hired muscle, or something to that effect. A freelance hired muscle, a hero for hire, even a Beowulf. But that character lives in that world and does sort of hero quests, or protecting certain people or avenging certain people against underworld forces. At the same time, I've had the idea for a character, and I mean, basically the hero for hire character, his story takes place over like a 7 to 14 volume series that I've sort of fleshed out portions of in my head. I haven't even fully built out the skeleton outline of each of them yet, but that's the distinct feel of how it all works. Now, there's another story set in a similar world, and that's the one I'm sort of playing with right now. I mean, there are a few other stories that could be done in a world like this, but for right now, the story character setting approach that I'm going with for this one is based off of the idea of, I don't want to say it's like Galaxy Quest, but I think that's, if I try to remember far back enough where the idea came from, there is a hint of that may have influenced this. Overall, the story setting is, again, a world in which some supernatural elements are hidden in, you pass through a doorway and you go into a room that shouldn't be there. And you've entered another realm where other things happen that we just don't know or experience very often in our world. And so it's a little bit of that. But the key part of this was the main character. Now, when I write a character, sometimes I come up with the role the character plays first, and like the incidental personal details sometimes don't emerge. So when I think I originally wrote this, I didn't make the designation of a name, a person's upbringing, or even their gender or age. I mean, it's just character A. And character A lives in this world where they're a mundane person in a mundane world until they're introduced to the paranormal. And that has the ability to move through a realm of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, where you have the call to adventure and the subsequent path that takes a person on. Now that could be the structure I go with. I'm still working on some of that, but the main character I built for this idea is a person who is a stage magician. So magic tricks and card tricks and that sort of thing, who somehow, and this is where Galaxy Quest comes in, somehow gets mistaken for somebody with actual wizarding powers and dragged into the realm of the wizarding magic world to help save somebody or do something. And so that's really the crux of the character. And so over like the last 48 hours-ish, I feel like for this one, the main character should be a young woman who's trying to become a stage magician in an industry heavily male-dominated. And just realizing, like, there are no female headliners for magic shows anywhere in the country right now. And so feeling that frustration and struggle with working some of that, she's getting these like birthday party gigs. And so the call to adventure happens in that scenario, and she's dragged into a realm of real magic and real magical creatures that she has to, deal with. But one of the other quirks I love to throw into a story is our weaknesses or limitations or vulnerabilities are, in a certain way, a special ability. And so, like, writing the story of if you're in a sorcerer's combat situation with somebody who's using actual spells and they have magical defenses against your counter spells, if you're not using actual magic, but you're just flinging spitballs at them, like legitimately, like magic tricks won't be blocked by anti-magic protections. And so this character's magic abilities will be strangely indefensible against. And their quirks for misdirection and confusion, their ability to distract and redirect attention, and the hand is faster than the eye, all these little tricks that you do on a stage will be a distinctive advantage against people who are used to a rules-based system of eldritch power. Like, it's a fun, quirky idea. Oh, my feet are falling asleep. Okay, so I love the idea of a character who is a mundane person with magic tricks being a powerful sorceress, I guess, at this point, in a realm of sorcerers, because nobody knows how to handle magic tricks. And I think some of this came from an idea years ago when I used to play Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, I played Dungeons and Dragons. Get over it. Where there's a type of spell called a cantrip. And these cantrips are 0-level magic spells. They're literally seen as useless effects for the most part. And I got to thinking, like, I don't know. I think with enough creativity, you could figure out how to use cantrips to do things that change the course of events in front of you. And so I had this idea years ago of a character that was, a fake magician, a fake magic user whose only ability was to do simple cantrips that didn't require any magical skill to do. And so this is some of that with a little bit of that Galaxy Quest, not really science fiction heroes, but the people you're helping think you are, and you have to step up and be the hero. Mixed a little bit with that urban, I don't want to call it urban fantasy, because that usually implies like you go down to the automat and get your sandwich out of one of the slots while you're hanging out with a dwarf and an elf. That's not what I'm going for here. But you get what I mean when I say it's a fantasy in a more contemporary time frame. It's contemporary fantasy. I don't know what to call it. So that's the one I'm going to play with. And, I try not to get super preachy with some of my ideas. So like the female magician in a man's world kind of thing, that's not going to be like a high focus or a preachy moment of it. It's just a fact that it happens and it fits with the character that I'm working with. I'm going to have some of those existing, I don't want to call them tropes, but patterns in fantasy where iron interferes with magic to a certain degree. So there's some of that. And looking in mirrors, seeing the reflection of something breaks the glamour spells that hide the truth of what the situation is sometimes. And so like having little rules like that you abide by. But I kind of want to, I want this to be more than one story. I want this character, maybe it's a short story, maybe it's a novella, maybe it's a full novel. Hang on, I'll sit sideways so I can let my feet not fall asleep. I want this to be a character that I revisit, because I think it has the potential to be used over and over again. So that the character and the setting and all of the things involved with it have the potential to be reused. And I feel like I want to dip into a little bit of Sherlock Holmes and a little bit of Columbo kind of stuff and get a sense for that whodunit mystery formula, that procedural mystery. And so I want this to be a private eye, like a supernatural private investigator who's actually just a stage magician who fell into this hero's journey and works as a PI for, in this case, I'm aiming, like the first one that I'm playing with right now is, I feel like I want to title it The Goblin's Daughter. And I want to sort of lampshade the fact that in a lot of fantasy, you have goblins and orcs as an entire race are like an evil monster race. And like, I sort of want to do a touch on not so much the race aspect of that. I mean, there will be some of that civil rights aspect to it, but I also want to examine a little bit of the concept of the caste system in India, where you see different castes, especially the what is it, the Untouchables, which has different meaning elsewhere, but the Untouchables are basically those who deal with the dead bodies or rat catchers or things like that, where they're beneath the lowest caste in the caste system. There are laborers, and then there are kings and soldiers and wise men. And so you have these 5 castes, and then you have underneath of that the people who are outcast. They are literally not considered human to a certain degree. And I feel like having a caste structure to a fantasy realm could potentially work relatively well, especially if you look at the mythology of elves and dwarves and like the Seelie court and the Unseelie court and the different classes and types of fae creatures in mythology. Some of them are purely mischievous, and some of them are downright dangerous and murderous, and some of them are benevolent and kind. And they're sort of portioned out into these classes and how one should deal and interact with different classes. And so if you take the concept of those classes and you just tweak them to be caste systems like they have in India, and this won't be a pure reflection of India. I don't have enough experience with Indian culture and caste systems to do an accurate reflection of that. But to take the minimal information one can glean from some simple research and use the stories that exist about it to inform choices made about this fictional system in which these people exist. And so for part of that, I want the call to adventure to sort of be a tragedy has happened to a member of a goblin family. But because goblins are the untouchable class, the classless, the outcast caste, nobody cares. Nobody's going to look into what happened to this person. And so they're lost, they're confused, they're desperate, and they're grieving. And nobody in the magical realm will help them. But perhaps one desperate one is stumbling around at night, having bridged through one of the gaps between our world and theirs, and encounters a stage magician. And having seen them perform what seems to be magic, makes a desperate plea for help. And that call to adventure brings our character into a whole world she never knew existed. And a whole place where her talents are beneficial to people, and where she can make a bigger difference than she can as a birthday party magician. And so I feel like right there is like a sale point for a character and a setting and a story and a series of stories. And half the fun of this idea for me is to do the whodunit story type over and over again, using the main character to solve these stories, but also do a little like research and understanding of actual magic tricks being the gimmick to how the day is won in each story. So a sleight of hand trick, or a bit of misdirection, or some other little quirk like that. Really do the research on real tricks and figure out a whodunit story where that real trick is the turning point. And I was like, oh, that would be so fun. That would be an amazing series of stories. And so I'm really getting into this idea right now. I love this character. I love the whodunit style. I love the idea of possibly doing the stories in such a way that a magic trick, a real world magic trick that you can learn, is what saves the day in each one. And I love the idea of this character adventuring in a world, helping a people who, a population. It's not just one race. It's goblins and orcs and trolls and those kinds of creatures, as well as any dwarves or elves or any of the other creatures that may seek the help of this character. But I love this idea of this character who's exploring these worlds, that there's magic in those worlds, and yet the greatest magic is a trick. And So I really love all of that. I think the thing I'm struggling with right now is the desire to set up a world that not only can I revisit over and over again without worrying about a later story having, oh, this would be really great, but I need to change a few of the rules. No, I need to work out all the rules beforehand so that doesn't happen. But I also feel like the other 3 or 4 modern day fantasy stories that I've been working on, I would love to be able to weave them back in and make them a larger universe. So the Were guy who's become a street samurai, I guess we can call him. Like, could they be in the same world? And as the stories are sort of built right now, like the story universe for that character has an element of the Were creatures in that universe are hidden, and it's not a part of everybody's everyday life. Nobody knows they exist except the people, the werewolves, the vampires, and the ghosts, and those types of things that exist within that realm. They know about each other, but they keep it secret from the rest of the reality. But the story I'm working on right now, it's not werewolves working at the duty free down the road and nobody knows about them because it's only at like family gatherings where the Were stuff comes out. No, this is legitimately like a separate world where you get taken to a certain, archway in the city, and you pass underneath that arch, and what should be, a dead end alleyway turns into a whole street that can't fit in the space where it is. Like, I feel like that's very different than the Were setting, and I'm trying to figure out how to reconcile that. I also have the Weird World War story that I was doing for the Choose Your Own Adventure video, Feytown Noir. That one has some elements of this separate world with Fey and elves in it, and some of the Were stuff involved in it. But that setting is different enough in the fact that after World War I, but before World War II, we got an invasion from an alien realm with elves and Fey and Were creatures, and they invaded, and now there are pocket neighborhoods that are like extra dimensional pockets that you can fit whole neighborhoods in a single, plot of real estate. 1 acre of land can fit 10 acres of neighborhood inside the city, like that kind of thing. And like that setting has everybody knows that fairies and werewolves exist. And so I don't feel like that one can fit in there. But I feel like there's got to be a way where I can reconcile that and pull it all back together. Because my mind says that would be an amazing thing to be able to do. And I don't know, maybe Feytown Noir takes place on a parallel Earth. Maybe one of those pocket universes that got pulled off to the side. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I can save that one. And I might be able to reconcile the Were universe and this one eventually. But there is like another contemporary fantasy setting that I want to play with. It's the idea of a skinwalker, which is similar to a Were creature. Somebody who dons the skin of an animal and can take that animal's form. I've in a lot of, there's some Native American mythology that treats them as like horrific demon monsters, and the history of skin changers in Europe. I mean, you have the Selkies that are not as often seen as evil, but sometimes they drown people. But for the most part, Selkies are not treated as evil monsters. But there are cases of like somebody who wears the skin of a wolf or a fox, and they go out at night to eat children, kind of thing. And I can maybe, the way I want to write those stories is that is along the lines of a lot of the stories that were told about like witches and even like Jewish populations where they'd steal children, or the gypsies steal your children if you leave them unattended, kind of thing. Those stories are like gross racist stories that exist and inform the legends that exist around populations. But in a world where the population of being racistly treated goes into hiding and nobody knows they exist. So in this case, the skinwalkers are just people with a different mode of existing and walking in the world. And so I built this elaborate mythology for them where it's a rite of passage as a child to find, they do a ceremony where all the kids of a certain age go out to a wooded area on their day of passage, and they must venture out into woods for a night or two alone and seek out their guide animal who will choose to come to them and sacrifice themselves so that the child can ingest the animal and then wear its skin, and forever from that point on they will be partnered together. Now, I built this story in that universe. It's very dark, it's very twisted, and it's not because of the character or the race being evil, but because of the misunderstanding and the persecution of those evil, supposedly evil beings. A horrible course has to be taken by two people on opposite sides of that conflict. And so I like that story. I don't know that it fits with the other Where universe or the one I'm working, the Magician and Fae universe that I'm working on right now. And I'm really tempted to spend like the next few hours just sitting down and contemplating how I can reconcile them all together. Because I really think like they're good standalone series of stories each. But I think they could make an amazing universe if I do it right. Now, I do know to a certain degree that these are first drafts. I don't have to get them right out the gate. I can get them mostly right, write them, and have them exist, and then I can fix them so they fit together later. But my brain keeps wanting to play with it because it's like a puzzle. It's like that puzzle I made months ago where I was trying to figure out how to get all the how to get all the pieces that fit together right. And I feel like that's the like half the appeal of this to me is like these are puzzle pieces that when fit together make an amazing bigger piece together. And I kind of just like, I'm gonna bang my head against this for hours, maybe even days, to figure out how all the pieces fit together, because I know there's got to be a way to do it. And if I can figure that out, I'm really excited about that. And I like this character. I haven't figured out the full situation with the first story for this character for this story that I'm working on right now. Like I feel like, the title The Goblin's Daughter sounds right. It's just one of those things that came to me when I was popping popcorn. I went like, The Goblin's Daughter sounds like a really good title for a story or a novel. All right. And I do have a sense that it's got to be a missing person, a kidnapping, or a murder. And I do have like a couple like key scenes that already came to me in my head of the main character as she's sitting after finishing a job as a stage magician for a birthday party, trying to figure out how she's going to make rent that month, and noticing that like a kid seems to be following her. A small person is following her. And not sure how to handle that. And catching a glimpse now and then through a mirror that reveals that this isn't a normal person. And then the conversation of a desperate goblin seeking somebody who can do magic to help solve this grieving situation they're in when the rest of their realm doesn't care. I get that. I can feel it. I can kind of see this scene in my head. But I'm not sure what the actual scenario is. I'm not sure what the trick that she can do that'll solve the end result would be. And I'm not sure, like, I'm not sure what it is that has the character, like, traditionally in a story like this, the hero's journey like this, Joseph Campbell said that there's the call to adventure, and sometimes there is the refusal of the call, and the consequences paid for that refusal ultimately result in the obeying the call to adventure anyway. Now, I'm not sure if this character is going to refuse the call or if they take the call, and I'm not sure what form the call takes, other than, in this case, I'm not even sure if the goblin she's helping is the daughter, or if the daughter is the case that needs to be solved. And so I need to hash out some of that detail. And so I'll do some exploring of some of my templates that I've made over time of what formats you can apply. And it's like I have some basic templates that I use that help you organize your thoughts a little bit. And they're based off of like what types of stories succeed. It's sort of like with music. There's the famous idea that with 4 chords you can play most of the pop culture music hits of the last 50 years, might even be the last 100 years. And so with those 4 chords, you can play most of these songs, but clearly these songs don't all sound identical. So you have these limited number of blocks that you assemble, and for whatever reason, this arrangement of blocks appeals to us so much that when you use those blocks, it's almost a given that we will enjoy the song. And so we have something similar we do in multiple genres of written fiction. We like a certain structure. That's where the hero's journey comes from, where you have the idea of we like somebody who starts out mundane, gets a call to adventure, usually encounters a mentor, gets to a setback, and then an overcoming of the villain, and then a return to the mundane world. That pattern comes from the fact that we are drawn to that sequence of events in a story because it resonates for us. And so I've built some of these templates out for story types that help me flesh out a simple skeleton at a certain point. And then the character, the setting, the other parts, they're the flavor. They're the harmony, the melody that goes over the four chords. They're the color scheme or the perspective on a painting. They're the thing that sells it. They're the thing that make it its own thing, but a thing that hits on keystones that we all echo to. The reason why, people like CSI or Law and Order, like, they're formulaic. They all follow a particular formula, and most TV we watch follows the 3-act or the 4-act drama. Sometimes you can get a little bit of an adjustment on that, but for the most part, they all follow the 3-act drama setup, and that's not a recrimination against that structure. It's like, oh, that's been used so many times. Yeah, it's been used since the foundation of telling stories. And it's been used because it's a pattern that we are familiar with and comfortable with, and tell us something in a way that's digestible. If you deviate too far from that, it gets messy and you lose people. And so I've got some of these templates that I can sort of squish my stories through. I feel like I need to revisit some of the outlines of stories I've written before, because there's the Skinwalkers, the Where, the Faytown Noir, and the modern fantasy that I'm working on. But there's also another story that it was a project I did for a class more than a year ago, an online class that I took. It's one of those free classes. You don't get any credit for it, but you do it. And it was a screenwriting class. It was one of the worst classes I've ever taken. It's like absolutely no structure. It was literally just somebody saying like, okay, so write something and then come back and then we'll tell you how to write act 2 next week. And then it's like next week was like literally just like, okay, so now what you need to do is up the ante so that this act, you're going to have things getting more tense. And at the end, you hit the climax. And then the third act is the resolution of that. And then that was literally the whole class. It was useless. But the story I was writing for my screenplay is I sort of temporarily titled it The Sandman Chronicles. And that one also has elements of fantasy and magic to it. And I feel like if I could tie that one in a little bit with at least the Where and the fantasy I'm working on right now, that would make an interesting universe. If I could figure out how to get the Skinwalkers in on the mix, that would make a really amazing universe. Faytown Noir, I think I'm going to have to just leave it as its own thing off to the side. I think it's just too different. It's too World War weird to connect as well with